He left me a note once. Just 4 words. I read it so many times the paper tore at the fold. I never wrote back. And I've spent every year since wondering if that was the bravest thing I ever did, or the most cowardly. If this kind of story is what you're here for, stay with me. Subscribe if you haven't already, because I pour everything into these. Now let me take you back to where it all began. This is Ava, and I want to be clear about something before I tell you any of this. I was never the girl who dreamed about being rescued. I wasn't waiting for my life to change. I was just trying to keep it from falling apart. I grew up in a small apartment in South Boston with my mother and my younger brother, Colin. My mother got sick when I was 22. Kidney disease, the kind that doesn't go away, the kind that just becomes your new normal. Dialysis 3 times a week, bills that didn't care about your feelings. Colin was 19, smart enough for a scholarship, fragile enough that one financial shock could unravel everything. So I did what made sense. I got the job that paid the most for the hours I had. I became a waitress at the Aldwych Club, a private dining establishment in the kind of Boston neighborhood where the money is so old it's practically archaeological. I was good at it. I want you to know that. I wasn't biding my time or secretly embarrassed. I was genuinely, professionally good. I could read a table in 30 seconds. Who was celebrating, who was negotiating, who was about to end a marriage over the appetizers. There's a certain kind of intelligence that only comes from watching people when they think no one important is watching. I had that. I used it. Liam Ashford came in every Thursday. Corner booth, black coffee, the sea bass, sparkling water he never finished. He was exactly what you'd expect an Ashford to look like. Tall, quietly dressed in the way that only very expensive clothes can look understated. The kind of man that a room adjusted itself around without him asking. The newspapers loved him. Old money heir, shipping dynasty, board seats on things I couldn't pronounce. But he always came alone. And none of the other servers liked taking his table, because he barely spoke. I didn't mind the quiet ones. They were easier than the loud ones. I want to be honest about when I first actually looked at him, not as a table assignment, but as a person. It was maybe 6 weeks into the Thursday pattern. His usual booth had been taken by a late reservation, and I had to redirect him. I expected irritation. These men always had irritation ready, like a card in their breast pocket. Instead, he paused, looked at the room for a second, and said, very quietly, "I'm starting to think the booth is the only thing I come here for." And then he almost smiled, at himself, not at me, at himself, like he'd caught himself admitting something small. I noticed his hands when I set down the coffee, not soft like the other men at their tables. There was a scar on his left knuckle, pale and old. I didn't ask. I never asked about things like that. But I thought about it later, which was the first sign I should have paid attention to. Over the following weeks, something settled into a quiet pattern between us. I became his default server without either of us ever saying so. He started leaving larger tips. Not flashy, not the kind that feel like a power move, just generous in a way that felt considered. I started making sure his coffee was always fresh, not just warm. Small adjustments, the kind you make unconsciously and then notice afterward with a vague sense of alarm. One evening, the club was nearly empty. A late event had been canceled and most of the staff had gone home early. Liam was still at his corner table, and he had that particular stillness about him. Not relaxed stillness, but the stillness of someone who has received news they haven't finished absorbing yet. I should have just cleared the adjacent tables and left him alone. That was the professional thing. But I sat down across from him for a moment, against every rule of the club, because something in me wouldn't let me walk past it. He didn't tell me what was wrong. I didn't ask. Instead, out of nowhere, he said, "Do you actually like it here? Not the job, Boston." I don't know why I answered honestly. I usually kept a careful, pleasant distance with guests, warm but sealed, like a letter you can feel but can't open. But something in the way he asked it, like he genuinely wanted to know, like my answer actually mattered to him, made me tell the truth. I told him about Colin's school, about my mother, about the way South Boston looked at 6 in the morning when you were walking to the bus and the city hadn't put its face on yet. I talked for maybe 4 minutes. He didn't interrupt once. He didn't redirect the conversation back to himself. He just listened, and I realized that I couldn't remember the last time someone had listened to me that way, completely, like I was the only thing in the room. I went home that night and told myself it was nothing, just a long shift and a tired mind, and a man who happened to be a decent listener. I almost believed it. After that evening, he began leaving things on the table that weren't part of any order. A book once, a worn paperback of a Joan Didion collection, a page folded down in the middle. A handwritten note another time, with the name of a photography exhibit at a small gallery near Beacon Hill. Nothing I could call romantic. No declarations, no lingering looks that crossed a line. Just these small, carefully chosen things that said, "I thought of you specifically." Which was somehow worse, because I could have resisted something obvious. I didn't know how to resist something quiet. I read the book. I went to the exhibit on my day off and stood in front of a photograph of a woman sitting alone on a fire escape for a long time, and I thought about what it meant that I was there because of him. And then I walked home in the November cold, feeling like I was carrying something I had no right to. The same week, I was clearing his table after he'd left, and a folded newspaper slipped from his coat he'd draped over the chair. I almost didn't look, but the photograph caught my eye before I could stop it. Liam, in a dark suit at some charity event, standing next to a woman with the kind of effortless elegance that comes from never once having had to think about money. The caption read, "Ashford heir and longtime companion Petra Voss expected to announce engagement." I folded the newspaper, set it neatly on the table, went back to work. And I didn't let myself feel it until I was outside at the end of my shift, standing in the cold with my coat half buttoned, and then I just stood there for a minute too long, breathing. The Aldwych hosted an Ashford family fundraiser a few weeks later, and I was assigned to work the event. That was the night I met Rosalind Ashford. She didn't speak to me then. She just looked at me. Once, briefly, from across the room. But it was the kind of look that meant she already knew everything she needed to. I felt it like a temperature drop. At the end of the night, after most guests had gone and the staff was clearing tables, I found the note. Small square of ivory cardstock, his handwriting, careful, slightly cramped. "Don't disappear on me." 4 words. I stood there, holding it under the low light of the empty dining room for a long time. Then I put it in my apron pocket, took it home, put it in a drawer, told myself I'd decide what to do with it in the morning. 2 days later, Rosalind Ashford arrived at the club before opening. She asked to speak with me privately. She was impeccably dressed, completely composed, and she wasn't cruel, which made it so much harder. She told me that Liam had been struggling since his father died 8 months ago, that Petra had stood by him through the worst of it, that the family had obligations, a kind of gravitational weight that existed long before either of them were born, and that I should think carefully about what I believed was actually happening here versus what I might be imagining. And then she said, quietly, "I don't think you're stupid, Ava. That's exactly why I'm here." I didn't say anything dramatic. I didn't cry. I just thanked her for her time, which I think surprised her, because what I felt in that moment wasn't humiliation or anger. It was something quieter and more painful. It was recognition. Because part of me already knew everything she was saying. Part of me had known it since the folded newspaper. I'd just been waiting for someone to say it out loud so I'd have permission to believe it. I requested reassignment the following week. Different section, different tables, different Thursdays. My coworker Daphne didn't push me. She was too smart for that. But before she let it go, she said, "You've been taking care of everyone your whole life, Ava. It's okay to want something that takes care of you." I didn't answer her, because there was no answer that was both true and kind. The last Thursday Liam came in, he asked for me by name. I know because Daphne told me after. He was redirected to another server. I watched from the kitchen doorway as he sat in his corner booth, looked toward the kitchen once, and then looked down at his menu. He didn't come back after that, and I told myself that was the right ending. Clean. No wreckage. A few months later, Colin came home with news about a supplemental scholarship he'd been awarded from a private charitable foundation. I was happy, genuinely, completely happy for him. But I did what I always do. I looked into it, and after enough layers of paperwork, the foundation traced back to an Ashford family charitable trust. I sat with that for days. I still don't know what it meant. Was it guilt? Was it Rosalind closing a transaction? Or was it Liam, doing the one thing he knew I would have refused if he'd offered it to my face, giving it in the only form I couldn't reject? I never found out, and I want you to understand that not knowing is its own particular kind of grief. It just lives in you differently, quietly, like a low sound you stop noticing until the room goes completely silent. 6 months after that, the engagement announcement went public. I saw it on my phone in a hospital waiting room while my mother's dialysis finished. I didn't cry. I made 2 coffees from the machine in the hallway, brought one to the nurse who always remembered my mother's name, sat back down, and breathed. That was all. Sometimes that's all you can do with something. Just breathe around it until it takes up less space. Years passed. My mother stabilized. Colin graduated. I took night classes, changed direction, built something new. Not because anyone handed me a ladder, but because I finally stopped spending all my energy holding the floor up for everyone else and saved a little of it for myself. I'm not the same person who worked those Thursday shifts, but I'm not ashamed of her either. She was doing the best she could with everything she had. A few months ago, I ran into Daphne at a coffee shop near the waterfront. We talked for 2 hours, and near the end, almost as an afterthought, she mentioned that Liam and Petra had separated quietly the year before. No public drama, no announcement, just over. She said that in the weeks after I left the Aldwych, he had asked about me once, just once. He asked if I was okay. That was all he asked. I used to imagine that if I ever heard something like that, I'd feel a door swinging open, some dramatic shift. Instead, I just felt sad. For him, for both of us, for the very specific sadness of 2 people who might have been something in a different life, with different gravity pulling at them. Because some things only make sense as memories. And maybe we were always better as a memory than we would have been as a reality. I still have the note, in the same drawer. I don't know why I keep it, except that it's the most honest thing anyone has ever asked me. Not "I love you," not "stay," just "don't disappear on me." 4 words from a man who had everything, except someone who saw him without the weight of all that everything attached. I was just a waitress serving food, and somehow, in a corner booth on a Thursday evening, in the space between a coffee refill and a cleared plate, something real happened. It didn't end the way stories are supposed to end, but it was real. And I've decided that's enough. If this story moved something in you, I really want to hear about it. Drop a comment below. Tell me if you've ever walked away from something because it felt like the right thing, even when it cost you. And if you're new here, subscribe. I tell more stories like this, and I put everything into every single one. Thank you, genuinely, for listening all the way to the end.